Hey everybody, in this review we continue Requests Month with Lost Planet Extreme Condition for PC, Xbox 360, and PlayStation 3. As a side note, this is not Colonies Edition. This review is coming to you courtesy of Lord Chaos. He sent this to me, so thank you. It is greatly appreciated. This is a third-person shooter that was first released in 2007 for Xbox 360, then later on for PC and PS3 as well. In May of 2008 we saw the release of Colonies Edition, which was across all systems, and it was basically just an upgraded version of the game with more content in it, more multiplayer maps and modes, that sort of thing. And unfortunately the PC version of that uses Games for Windows Live, which will be shutting down in July of this year. So it may well become completely unplayable after that. The original version of the game does not use Games for Windows Live, so you'll still be able to play that. But as far as I'm aware, Capcom doesn't have any plans to remove Games for Windows Live from the Colonies Edition, so anyone who owns that may well be stuck with a completely unplayable game. We'll see. But that said, this game is pretty much a guilty pleasure game to begin with. I mean, you go into this thing knowing it's going to be pretty ridiculous. So the question becomes, is that to its strength? Is it actually the good kind of ridiculous? Or does it do something else entirely? Well, before we really get into the meat of the game, let's first talk about the presentation, because it's well worth mentioning that it was widely praised when it came out for having absolutely phenomenal graphics in particular. Well, even after 7 years, it actually doesn't look bad. It doesn't look particularly great either. I mean, there's a lot of low-res textures, there's a distinct lack of colors in this game, except for certain things that glow, but other than that, there's really not all that much color in it, and you kind of expect that. The world you're on is pretty much just a frozen wasteland, so there's a lot of snow and ice and rock, and that's pretty much it. So there's a lot of white and gray, but it at least fits. It's supposed to be this frozen landscape that's just constantly snowing and everything, so you would expect it to not have all that much color in it. Where the color comes in is on the monsters themselves, the Akrid, where there's a lot of spots on them that glow brightly, and it's usually a bright orange, and as you hit them for damage, it will start getting redder and redder. But that's where your color comes in, and this use of color to differentiate the Akrid from pretty much everything else does help in some way, but the lack of colors does wear on you after a while. But it's not really that bothers me the most about it. Despite looking pretty decent, when you throw in the particle effects this game has, where there's tons of smoke getting kicked up and tons of snow in your face, it's really hard to see what you're doing half the time. So you've got this wintry wonderland, so to speak, but it kind of gets in your way. And it's not even so much the snow gets in your way. You can actually see through the snow. I mean, when you're in blizzard conditions, you would expect it to not have very good visibility. But when you actually get into the combat and all these huge clouds of smoke are getting thrown up into the air, it becomes really hard to see what you're doing. And they take quite a while to actually clear out. Compound that with the sometimes awkward camera angles, and it gets a bit dicey when you're trying to figure out what's going on. And sometimes the action moves so fast that you can't even really tell what's going on to begin with. So that can be a problem. But that said, the graphics themselves look pretty decent, even today. And you have to keep in mind also that this thing was designed around Xbox 360 hardware, so that's really impressive that they managed to pull this off, to have such massive scope in this game. I mean, some of these monsters are gigantic, and it runs really, really well, even as a PC port. So they're certainly to be commended on that. But then there's the sound design, where the sound effects themselves are pretty average for the most part. They do their job, they work pretty well. The weapons don't really sound really great, but they certainly don't sound weak either. Even if they are weak, like the machine gun, for instance. It's pretty much the weakest weapon in the game, but even then, it doesn't sound all that weak. And the music's just meh. I hardly even noticed it, because the sound effects were taking up so much noise that the music just kind of got drowned out by them. But that said, it's pretty standard kind of action-y music, so don't expect too much from it. But the voice acting is where the game really falls flat as far as its presentation goes. It's bad, but it's the kind of bad that at least you can laugh at. Because it's done in this very cheesy, over-dramatic way, as is fairly typical for a lot of older Japanese games in particular that get ported over to the West. The voice acting is just downright cheesy, and sometimes it's so cheesy it gets funny, so at least you can laugh at it. But that said, sometimes it really does wear on you. But obviously what really matter here are the story and the gameplay, although the story, I don't know why you would care about it much. It's pretty much a B-movie, a really bad B-movie. But the idea is that in the far future, humanity has tried to colonize space, and they come across this planet, EDN3. And on this planet are this giant bug race called the Akrid. And they have this stuff in them that is a source of thermal energy, or T-ENG. And so humanity's like, hey, we want this stuff, but the only way to get it from the Akrid is to destroy the Akrid. So we need a way to destroy the Akrid. So now they have VSs, vital suits. They're basically mechs, and they use these to kill the Akrid and take the thermal energy and do stuff with it. But that's just the backstory. And the game does a really, really annoying job of explaining that to you with an unusually long cutscene at the beginning of the game. In fact, the cutscenes in this game are longer than they should be, and the game puts too much emphasis on them. Luckily, you can skip them, and you can save yourself the ridiculous garbage storyline. Let's face it, the plotline in this is absurd. You play as a guy named Wayne. He gets frozen in the snow after watching his father get killed, supposedly by this humongous monster called the Green Eye. It's one of the really badass Akrids. And eventually he gets nursed back to health and takes it upon himself to destroy the Akrid and render the planet habitable. Along the way, he runs into this group called Nevik, who are a human group that want the planet for their own purposes and such like that. And you end up fighting them. You also fight some snow pirates, and it doesn't really make a whole lot of sense. Let's put it that way. It's just a convoluted mess that they thought was interesting and dramatic. Or at least that's the way the voice acting tries to throw it off as. The voice acting is hilarious. It's overly dramatic to suit the storyline's overly dramatic nonsense. And I guess you can enjoy the story in the sort of sense that it's so bad it's funny sometimes, but more often than not it just actually gets annoying. So I found that the story was rather pathetic and really got in the way of the rest of the game, so I tended not to pay much attention to it. So, how's the gameplay? Well, I have to get it out of the way first. It's obviously a console port. Even though it runs pretty well for the most part, the graphics options are pretty decent for a PC version. It displays all the button prompts as Xbox 360 button prompts. Now, for most of the button prompts in the game, it also displays the default key, but the problem is it's the default key. It doesn't display it if you've actually rebound the key. So, for instance, my action button, as I was on foot, it turns out that the control schemes for being in a VS versus being on foot are actually different, and you need to change them. But the button prompt it kept displaying as the action button was E, and I switched it to F, just because that's what I'm used to. And that got kind of annoying, particularly when I would jump into a VS, and up until then, my use of the F key was fine for the action button. Now suddenly the action button is E, which is coincidentally the way you jump out of a VS as well. It got kind of annoying, and that never really felt natural. I probably should have tried to switch the action button as the VS to the F key, but I just didn't. And ultimately, the controls kind of got annoying, particularly considering the mouse sensitivity was so off. I had to edit an INI file to actually get that to work properly, because as it stands, on even the highest sensitivity, it was far too slow. It was clearly designed around analog sticks rather than a mouse. So, what ends up happening is that it takes a lot of time to get used to the controls, because they're a bit awkward. Even though it's a pretty simple third-person shooter. 2-weapon limit, the controls are pretty much what you'd expect from a third-person shooter for the most part. It's just getting used to them, because, let's face it, when everything's shown as an Xbox 360 button prompt, particularly when it's telling you how to pilot the VS's, it literally just shows you a screen of all the commands on the Xbox 360 controller as opposed to the PC. So if you're like me and you don't have a 360 controller to actually use on this game, then, well, you're kind of screwed. It took me a long time to really get any sort of semblance of comfort playing with the VS's, as opposed to running around on foot, which was just fine. I mean, it controls like a third-person shooter right then. But maneuverability is kind of a big deal when you're in a mech suit. So the issues I was having with that were pretty significant. Now that said, once I finally figured out all the controls, it was fine. But going into this thing and expecting to be able to play it right off the bat, turned out I wasn't. I had to actually edit INI files, and it was a mess. So it's not that great of a PC port, even though the graphics options are pretty fully featured and all that sort of thing. And it runs really well, for the most part. So, it's a bit of a black mark on there. That said, the actual gameplay is pretty simplistic, like I said. 2-weapon limit, you're running around blasting things. You have pretty simple weaponry. For the most part, it's all just standard stuff. You start every level with a machine gun, and nothing but a machine gun with 300 rounds. You do have to reload your weapons, although the weapons with infinite ammo use thermal energy to actually power them, so I'll get to that in a moment. But they don't have to be reloaded. Your normal weapons, like machine guns, rocket launchers, that sort of thing, those do have to be reloaded. And you can also go around picking up the heavy weapons that the VS's use, but whenever you use them, you're basically rooted in place, because they're just huge weapons, and you gotta be rooted in place to be able to deal with the recoil and everything. So with those, it's better to just get into a VS and just use them in that, because when you're in a VS, you can have up to 2 weapons, and you can use them at the same time. Now, on the Xbox 360 controller, that would mean using the left and right triggers, depending on what weapon you're wanting to use. Well, on the PC, it's just left and right mouse button. It works fine. In fact, it's pretty natural for the most part. The only problem is, when you're in a VS, your mobility is really a problem, and dodging a bunch of missiles and stuff is actually kind of hard. Some people would say it's not, but it kind of is. Because you don't get a dodge move. Unlike when you're on the ground and running around, you actually get a dodge move. But the way you dodge is to hold the crouch button and then press the space bar, which is jump, and a direction. It's weird. I don't know who designed that, but it's just awkward. Anyway, as you can tell, the controls are a problem, even though it is a very simple third-person shooter where you're just running around blasting stuff, and basically, if it glows, shoot it. That's about all I can say. I mean, it's just how the game is. If it glows, shoot it. Okay. It becomes very obvious very early on. That's what you need to do. Because those are the weak spots. If you shoot anything else, well, it's just not going to work. And they've done a pretty decent job of giving you a bunch of enemy variety. I mean, you're dealing with a lot of gigantic insect kind of creatures, so there's plenty of room for that. There's things that look like giant moths and giant scorpions and things like that, so they do have a pretty decent variety as far as the enemies go. But when you fight the human enemies, it gets laughable because the AI is clearly designed around the monsters, not people. The human enemies in this game are incredibly stupid. They just kind of sit there and let you blast them to bits. So, they're pretty pathetic. Bosses are pretty predictable too. They tend to do the exact same things over and over again. They have very predictable patterns, and it's very easy to take most of them out. It's just a matter of being able to hit things. Because you can't aim up. Well, you can, to a certain degree, and then you're kind of stuck, and you can't aim even higher than that. Which is kind of annoying. Particularly on the huge enemies that tend to get in your way. There are a couple of camera perspectives. There's the fixed camera, which is pretty much what you're expecting in a third-person shooter, and then there's the cruise camera, where the aiming is independent of you, basically. So, that's what you're used to if you play it on console, because that's the standard for the console. But if you're playing it on PC, then the standard is fixed. So, it's just something that's personal preference, really. It has 3 versions of it. The third one, you have your fixed, you have your cruise, and then you have accelerated, which is just cruise only. It's takes into account mouse acceleration, stuff like that, I think. At least that's as far as I can tell. So, it's just personal preference. I preferred the fixed camera, because just I'm used to that from third-person shooters. But the problem with this game is that it's just tedious. They tried to throw in something that gives you more urgency, which is the T energy, the thermal energy. You require that to live, and if you have it, it will also heal you. If you're in a VS, the VS doesn't heal, but if you're on the ground running around as just a person, you can actually automatically heal. And this requires thermal energy. It also expends thermal energy when you're just running around or doing just about anything. You get thermal energy by picking it up. It's that orangish goo that spills out of enemies when they die. Or you can go to these posts that are all over the place and do button mashing with the action button to actually get a very large amount of it. The problem is that it doesn't really give you any sense of urgency, except for in maybe one spot in the game when it's just scarce, at least for a few minutes, and then suddenly you've got a lot of it and you're like, whatever. It doesn't drain very quickly, so you never find that it gives you this sense of urgency that it seems like it wants to give you. It's a bit of a problem, but not a huge deal. And so the game ends up being kind of tedious. You're just kind of running around, blasting hordes and hordes and hordes of bugs, and doing the exact same things over and over and over again, finding thermal energy, picking up the same weapon. I mean, I used the machine gun for the entire game because it's the one weapon I could rely on the most. I found that using pretty much anything else except for rocket launchers was actually kind of stupid. Except for the rifle. I used the rifle on occasion. You'd think that a game with such wide open distances would be great for long-range combat, but it actually makes things worse. I mean, the game's just really easy. Enemy AI is incredibly predictable. It's very easy to take out most of the enemies. The thermal energy mechanic never becomes a hindrance. It's just kind of there, and you barely even notice it half the time. The actual gunplay is rather unsatisfying. It's just standard, really. Just lots of bullet spongy kind of things going on, unless you hit the weak spots, and even then they're kind of bullet spongy. It's very easy to tell how enemies are supposed to be defeated. And really the only thing that's going to get in your way is the numbers. So, what is Lost Planet exactly? Well, it's a guilty pleasure game. It's not particularly good. It's not particularly bad either. I mean, well, the writing is terrible. But it's terrible in the kind of way that it can at least be laughed at. It's like a B-movie. It's not necessarily supposed to be good. And I think that's kind of its strength. Now, I didn't really like it, and I can't really recommend it. But if you're looking for something that's just a standard kind of third-person shooter, but it happens to have gigantic bugs in it, and you can't get a copy of Earth Defense Force, for instance, well, I want to pick up Lost Planet. It's pretty cheap, so you might get something out of it. I personally didn't really get anything out of it, but you might get something out of it. I give it a 2.5 out of 5. Thanks for watching.